I am Diane Smith, and I'm going to chair this session for you. I'm delighted to say I'm now Vice President of the TCPA, but previously, as many of you will know, I was very involved in the development of the Perfect Project, which was alarmingly over 7 years ago that we first started looking at this topic. And I have very mixed views about the role of green infrastructure today, because for maybe all the wrong reasons, it's much higher up the agenda than it was 7 years ago because of COVID, which makes this conference particularly timely. It's also very fitting that the first session on green infrastructure is indeed on green infrastructure and health, because of course planning had its roots in public health. At the turn of the 20th century, 19th, 20th century, of course, it was Ebenezer Howard, the founder of the Garden City movement, that looked at the state of public health in the slums of London, overcrowding, terrible sanitary conditions, and of course, shocking air pollution. And really came up with the idea of the garden cities, which is linking town and country. And of course, TCPA has continued to do that for well over 100 years now. In fact, the original Garden City principles had the complete linking of the two by going and building in greenfield sites. Today's Garden City principles also include the recommendation that 50% of new garden cities should be green infrastructure. And the London plan is actually aiming to go for 50% plus. So we've definitely been in the right place at the right time. And link all of that with the element of social justice, which is so important to all of us as well. When the idea and the opportunity to run the Perfect Project came along, it seemed to be the right vehicle for us to pursue at that particular time. Interreg, though, always comes with a lot of strings attached in terms of getting the money. And this particular project had to concentrate on encouraging investment in green infrastructure. And again, linking that with health proved to be quite a persuasive argument. And we concentrated on looking at the multi-benefits of green infrastructure, but from the start it was quite clear that health was very high on the agenda for all of the partners. We undertook a SWOT analysis, and without any question at all, the highest challenge that all of the partners face was the lack of interdepartmental working, the lack of joined up thinking at the local authority level to actually address issues related to green infrastructure. It was too often seen as the Parks Department end of, without looking further. And so this combination of linking planning and health became important to the TCPA. And then when you combine that with the role of green infrastructure, it becomes a tripartite approach that is very powerful. And we have two really excellent speakers in this session who are going to explain ways in which you can link planning, health, and green infrastructure, the three things that are very important. Firstly, from the TCPA, we have Julia Thrift, who is responsible for all of the projects that the TCPA undertakes in relation to health, planning, social justice. Julia has a history of working in green infrastructure, and welcome, Julia, and previously worked for CABE, and is also running the Green Infrastructure Partnership for the TCPA, which is a very powerful lobby. We will then have Imke. Imke, I'm so sorry, for 7 years I've been not being able to say your name properly, so here we go again. Imke van Moorselaar from Amsterdam, and Imke is a health expert and has worked very closely throughout the project with the stakeholders and policymakers from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam, in delivering and developing some excellent solutions to this particular problem. So we're going to start first with Julia, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Diane. I'm just going to share my screen. Right, so I hope you can all see that. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to everyone wherever you are. And it's wonderful to see that there are people from all over Europe and beyond joining us today. As Diane has said, my name's Julia Thrift, and I work at the TCPA on our Healthier Placemaking work. I'm going to be talking about how landscape shapes our health and our well-being. I'm sure many of you know the TCPA, but for those of you that don't, we work across the UK and beyond to challenge, inspire and support people to create healthy, sustainable and resilient places that are fair for everyone. And over the many years that the TCPA has been working, we've done a lot of thinking around the links between planning and green infrastructure and health. And particularly in the last few years, we've had a strand of work called Reuniting Health with Planning, which has brought planners and public health workers and green infrastructure experts together to help to create healthier places. And we've learned a lot from that work, and we've published a number of different reports about planning healthier places, and they're all free to download from our website on the page you can see there. We've also worked with partners such as Public Health England and NHS England, which is the health service in England, to create a guide to creating new places that will support people's health. And this is called Putting Health into Place. Again, it's free to download. And although it focuses on creating brand new settlements, brand new communities, and how to create them in ways which mean they'll support people's health, it's also full of advice that's relevant to transforming existing places. So I thought we could start by thinking, what is health? We all talk about it without really thinking about what exactly it means. The most commonly accepted definition is the one that the World Health Organization has, which is that health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being. And it's not just the absence of disease or infirmity. And I think that's a really good place to start, because we're not just talking about not being ill, we're talking about people flourishing, about them thriving, about them being in a really good physical, mental and social state. So what keeps people healthy? Often when we talk about health, people immediately think about doctors and nurses and hospitals being the things that keep us healthy. But although doctors and hospitals and nurses are very good at mending us when we get ill, they're not the things that actually keep people healthy. The things that help us stay healthy are the things around us. It's where we live. Do we live in a good home? Do we live in a green environment, an environment that helps us be active? Do we have friends and neighbours nearby who we can turn to, who support us? And I think during the lockdown, we really learnt how important it is to have good friends and neighbours, and how important that is for our well-being. The local economy, is there a job that you can do? Are there things you can do nearby, activities you can do nearby that will keep you healthy? The built environment, the places we live in, support health, or if they're badly designed, can undermine our health. And then there's the natural environment and the global ecosystem, which are vital for supporting people's health. So although there are some things that influence our health that we can't change, like how old we are or our genetic makeup, there are an awful lot of things that influence our health that can be changed for the better or for the worse. Before the pandemic, in most Western societies, there was an epidemic of avoidable illness. So although these statistics are mostly about England, these problems are prevalent in many Westernized countries. So It was calculated that about half the appointments people had with their doctors were about illnesses that could have been prevented. And I think that's a really shocking figure. That's an awful lot of people who are ill unnecessarily, and an awful lot of healthcare services that we're having to pay for that could have been avoided. And the sort of things that are causing this ill health are being lonely, which can have both physical and mental impacts, being overweight and underactive, and poor diet. And I think certainly in this country, poor diet is one of the major causes of ill health, which people are often unaware of. And of course, during the pandemic, different health and well-being problems came to the fore. It became really clear that for people living in spacious accommodation in good flats with nice parks nearby had a much better experience of the pandemic than people who are living in poor quality homes, perhaps with no green spaces nearby. And the links between poverty and inequality and poor health became very much to the forefront of the things we were talking about, and much higher up political agendas. And in the UK, as in other countries, there are very stark health inequalities. The people who suffered worse from COVID tended to be poorer people living in worse homes, in more difficult places with less work and so on. And those health inequalities became much more apparent. So what are health inequalities? The health inequalities are avoidable and unfair differences between different groups of people's health and well-being. So differences in how many years people live, and in England it's quite common for some groups of people to live, into their 80s or 90s, whereas people in a neighbourhood nearby might on average live much, much less, maybe 20 years less. And it's also about whether people live a healthy life. Some groups of people live a long life with lots of years of good health. Other groups of people live a shorter life with many more years of ill health. And those are differences that could be avoided. They're unfair and avoidable differences. So how can we reduce those health inequalities? In 2008, Professor Michael Marmot was asked to look at this and came up with a very influential report. And his conclusion in brief was that we should support everybody's health, but we must focus the resources most on the needs of the people who are least healthy. And so I'm going to be talking about the implications of that for the way that we plan and create green infrastructure. So thinking about the major influences on health, it's physical activity, diet, local green infrastructure, connections with people and place. And in fact, good green infrastructure is a thread that goes throughout all of these things, as I'll explain as we go on. There's plenty of evidence for what makes a healthy place. This is a very useful review of all the evidence. It's written in very clear English. It's got lots of good diagrams, and it brings together the evidence for healthy placemaking. So thinking about physical activity, it's incredibly important to keep active. And it's so important that the former chief medical officer said, if physical activity were a drug, we would refer to it as a miracle cure. And in England, a lot of people are not at all physically active, and that has a huge impact on their health. So as you can see from this chart, keeping physically active, and that doesn't mean running a marathon, it could just be going for a walk every day, dancing, doing a bit of swimming. It could be quite low-level physical activity. It still is incredibly beneficial for people's physical health and their mental health, and wards off all sorts of illnesses. So good green spaces are a fantastic way of encouraging people to be physically active. This is a space near where I live. It was for many years neglected, unattractive, nobody went there, and it's been transformed. You can't see, but it's actually in the middle of a very built up urban area, and it's the most wonderful oasis. It's tucked away, but so many people go there now. That was part funded with EU money, and it's had an amazing effect on people's health. And even in the middle of winter on a freezing cold day, when I went there on my bike, it was absolutely full of people of all ages, all backgrounds, being active. That was incredibly good for people's health. But as far as I know, none of the money to create or look after that space comes from our health budgets. And finding the money to improve green spaces is a huge struggle, despite all of the evidence of the health benefits they bring. So thinking about physical activity and Michael Marmot's finding that we should help everybody be active, but support the needs of those who are least fit and healthy. What does that mean? Well, it means that, yes, we should create places where people can travel actively, where they can walk and cycle, but we must think about the needs of the people who are least active. If we just create cycle paths for people who are really fit and healthy, well, that'll help them, but they're already fit and healthy. To have a healthy society, we need to support the health of the people who are least healthy. And that means quite simple things sometimes, like making sure that there are places where people can sit down and have a rest if they're not that fit and healthy. A year ago, at the beginning of the pandemic lockdown in England, one of the reactions of park managers, I think it threw a sort of slight sense of panic, was to put tape over some of the park benches so that people couldn't sit down because they were worried about people sitting and chatting and catching COVID from each other. But you could argue that that was absolutely the wrong thing to do, because it meant that people who were fit and healthy could go to the park, but people who were perhaps older or frail or not very well or pregnant might not go to the park because they wouldn't be able to sit and rest. So although that was done with good intentions, it was actually not very good from the point of view of health inequalities. And in the Putting Health into Place guide, which I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of practical advice about creating places where people of all ages and backgrounds will want to go out and be active. And one of the things we know is that if we create places which have neighbourhoods that have all the things that people need every day nearby, that people will be much more likely to walk or cycle to get to those places. So the evidence says that complete, compact, connected neighbourhoods are really good for our health because they encourage us to be active and to meet our neighbours. And again, the Putting Health into Place document has really good advice for how to plan new neighbourhoods to be like that. And the TCPA has recently published a guide to creating 20-minute neighbourhoods, which is all about how we can transform existing neighbourhoods to be complete, compact and connected. Again, it's free to download, so do have a look at that on our website. Diet is, particularly in England, a major cause of ill health. I think perhaps less so in some other European countries, but it is one of the major causes of illness in this country, which isn't always appreciated. Green infrastructure has a really positive role to play in improving diets, partly because creating places for people to grow their own food will allow them to have affordable, local, fresh vegetables and fruit, but also because it makes healthy eating seem normal. For kids growing up, perhaps surrounded by fast food shops, it's really important that kids can see where food comes from, how it can be grown, and that healthy food is a normal part of everyday life. And local green infrastructure is incredibly good for health. Over the last 10 years, the evidence around the health benefits of green infrastructure has grown enormously. It benefits everyone, but it particularly benefits the least healthy. So good local parks and green spaces are an effective way of reducing health inequalities. I'm not going to run through all the many benefits of green infrastructure for health. I expect you know what they are, but they are multiple. And this document brings together all the evidence about the health benefits of green infrastructure. So very useful source of evidence. And the Perfect Project itself has published a very useful guide, which makes that important link between green infrastructure, creating healthy populations which are good for the economy. And I think that link isn't made enough. So often, certainly in the UK, providing and looking after green infrastructure is seen as a cost. It's not seen as an investment in people and places that will bring economic benefits. And I think that's a really important thing that the Perfect Project has helped to do, is to help demonstrate that green infrastructure has economic benefits. And partly it achieves that by helping people be healthier. Thinking about local green infrastructure, it's really important to have good data about where green infrastructure is, what quality it is, and who uses it. For a long time in the UK, we didn't have that data, but we now do. And what it tells us is that people living in less well-off areas tend to have less green infrastructure, and it's worse quality. So if we're going to invest in green infrastructure, we need to think about where we're going to invest, and we need to invest to help people with the worst health, who tend to be the worst off people, and not just make nice parks even nicer, but really invest in the parks that are run down that would really benefit local people's health and well-being. And that means providing places that work for all ages and all abilities. I've put those two photographs together because the one in the top right-hand corner is a traditional green space that is provided through the planning system in this country. And it's a playing pitch. That photograph was taken on a Saturday afternoon. There was nobody using it. I wouldn't go there. There's nothing to do there. Not for me. I don't play football. Why would I go there? And I think we need to think about, when we create green spaces, what is there for people to do? Why would they go there? Why would an elderly person go there, an old person? Why would kids go there? And not just assume that if we create a patch of grass that it's good for people's health. We need to go further than that. The other thing that underpins our health and well-being that I mentioned earlier is having a connection with the people and the place you live. It's really important for people's well-being that they feel that they belong to the place where they're living. And quite ordinary green spaces have a really important part to play in that. The I1 project from the University of Sheffield demonstrated that really ordinary green spaces, just seeing some ordinary plants nearby, can be incredibly important to people's well-being. Partly it's to do with the sense of time. Going to a park that has been there for many years before you were born and thinking that perhaps your children and your grandchildren might go there can be a very comforting thought for many people. So local green infrastructure doesn't have to be particularly amazing. If it's well designed and well cared for, it can have multiple benefits, including the sense of well-being and identity. This is my local park, and I took this photograph on a summer afternoon, and the schools had just closed and it was the beginning of the summer holidays, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids went to the park, and they were rushing around, so happy, absolutely full of joy. It was amazing. And I bet for the rest of their lives, if those children go back to that space, they'll remember that afternoon, and that's part of that sense of belonging. And it's just so important that there are spaces where things like that can happen. But there are a lot of challenges to creating good green spaces. And one of the things we're becoming more aware of is that people's cultures and experiences and backgrounds mean that they experience and think about and perceive green spaces in different ways. A recent study in London found quite big differences between what people from one ethnic group and people from another ethnic group like in a park or green space. So a big open sort of wild green space looked really attractive to some groups of people, but didn't look attractive to other people who thought it was a bit wild, unkempt, and why would you go there? And we really have to think about creating places that work different groups of people, particularly the people who most need them, the people with the worst health, the people who don't have gardens. So you can't just create a space and assume people will all like it, even if you do. This report also demonstrated that people on low incomes, and they're the people who are likely to have the worst health, are less likely to have good green space nearby. And so again, when we think about investing in green spaces and green infrastructure, we need to be really careful to make sure that that investment benefits the people who really need it most. And that's why having data about the location and the quality of green spaces and how people perceive them is so important. So when we create green spaces, we can't just assume that everyone will like them and everyone will want to go there. This is a green space on the Greenwich Peninsula, Bison Flats. I think it looks lovely. It's full of wildflowers, but other people might not. It's not actually very easy to get into it, that particular bit. If you weren't very steady on your feet, if you were a bit frail or elderly, you might find it difficult to get in there. For some people, it might just look really boring. So we have to understand how people perceive spaces and whether they find them welcoming and whether they can physically access them. So in conclusion, there's now very strong evidence that green infrastructure is good for people's mental and physical health. We know that good local green infrastructure helps reduce health inequalities, which is incredibly important for creating a healthier society. But often the people who need that good green infrastructure most have the least of it nearby. And also people from different cultures, with different ages and ethnicities, perceive green infrastructure differently. So I suppose my message is, don't assume that you know what type of places and spaces people want. Go out and ask them and listen to what they say. Thank you.
Right. Hello, everybody, again, and thank you, Julia. That was full of really excellent information. And I'd just like to remind people that you can access that information on the TCPA website or the Perfect. It's not a website, but you can access it through Perfect as well. We will have questions after Imke's presentation for both Julia and Imke. And if you do have questions, can I encourage you to sort of start putting them in the Q&A, and then we can launch straight into them when Imke has finished his presentation. Imke is actually advisor on environmental and health to the Public Health Service of Amsterdam, and has been, I think the main word I would use to describe Imke is enthusiasm. We've been on many study visits and seen some excellent examples of green infrastructure in Amsterdam, from the Zuidas business district, the rainproofing program, and the schoolyards in particular, much of which are being covered in other presentations. But today he's going to talk to us very much about positive health, links between health and green infrastructure. And we've discovered we do have time for a video as well. So over to you, Imke.
Okay, thank you, Diane, for these kind words. Let me share my slides with you. All right. Yes, good morning, everybody. As I was introduced, my name is Imke van Moorselaar. I work at the Public Health Service of Amsterdam in the Department of Environment and Health. This session is about green infrastructure and health. In this conference, we learn about the multiple benefits of green infrastructure, but here I will focus on green infrastructure and health. As a starters, here you can see the Public Health Service of Amsterdam. It's located in the city center. And the past year, as probably all of you, we have been very busy with the coronavirus pandemic, as our department plays an important role in testing and vaccination. But besides fighting corona, we have two main priorities as a health service. Our first one is to promote the health of all people living in Amsterdam and the surroundings of Amsterdam. And our second aim is to reduce socioeconomic health inequalities. In Amsterdam, it's still the case, as in many other European cities, it was also explained by Julia, that we observe differences in the health situation of residents with a lower and higher level of education. And this leads to considerable health differences between neighborhoods within our city. On average, residents with a high level of education enjoy good health almost 20 years longer than poorly educated residents. Yeah, to me, those numbers are quite shocking. And as a health service, we try to reduce these differences, and green infrastructure can play a role to achieve this. The way we think about health in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands, that's changing. In the past, health was primarily seen as the absence of disease. The focus was more on health problems. That approach is also reflected in the WHO, the way they describe health, because in the first part of their sentence, they state health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. I think I can argue that if you say that complete state of physical, mental health, and social well-being, that maybe almost nobody is healthy. So in the Netherlands and in Amsterdam, we've shifted our focus towards a new concept of positive health. We believe that this new concept better acknowledges the importance of resilience and own strengths in the everyday lives. We now consider health as the ability to adapt and self-manage in light of the physical, emotional, and social challenges of life. And having access to green infrastructure in our cities, and at least for Amsterdam, there is becoming overcrowded more and more, that is vital to sustain this type of resilience in our own personal lives. Green infrastructure, it directly relates to the 6 important dimensions of positive health. And what those dimensions are, I will show in the next slide. Here you can see actually the concept of positive health. Positive health can be visualized as a spider web with 6 dimensions. And these 6 dimensions are bodily functions, mental well-being, meaningfulness, quality of life, social and societal participation, and daily functional. And in the next slides, I will highlight some of these pillars of positive health in relation to green infrastructure. Urban green spaces provide opportunities for active lifestyles and therefore are important for the pillar of bodily functions of positive health. Green spaces often provide an attractive environment, which is inviting for physical exercise. And being active promotes physical and mental health across the lifespan. The pictures you can see on the left, they are from 2 parks in Amsterdam. And as you can see, these spaces offer an accessible and attractive setting for natural play, and the one on the bottom left to swim on a hot summer day. But green spaces may also increase active transport. Natural features may lead people to favor walking or cycling over other transport modes by making routes to destinations more attractive. In other words, people leave the car and take the bicycle or go by foot. And in Amsterdam, we've performed a study in a park which was being renovated and upgraded. And over a period of 3-year times, we observed that these investments led to increased use and increased physical activity. And what was also nice, this park is actually surrounded by neighborhoods, low-income neighborhoods. So therefore, therefore even better that we saw this nice results. Another dimension of positive health that strongly relates to green infrastructure is mental well-being. Green spaces provide an attractive environment, offering peace and tranquility in the often hectic urban life. These are all pictures taken in Amsterdam, and I would argue, and I hope you agree, that even looking at them makes you feel relaxed, let alone if you are the person sitting there. It has been recognized for centuries that contact with nature can be restorative, and evidence of mental health benefits from having contact with nature and green spaces are well documented. Many studies have demonstrated restorative psychological responses associated with viewing or being in green space. And these effects, among others, they include reduced blood pressure, reduced heart rate, lower levels of stress hormone after visiting a green space. Green spaces, they can also play an important role in fostering social interactions and promoting a sense of community. Urban green spaces can increase community cohesion and inclusion of individuals into society in different ways. One important aspect is that they are free and accessible to all. Also, simply they just provide a space for human interactions. And as we have seen on the previous slide, they relieve stress and restore mental fatigue, which may aid in reducing aggression, which can help in feeling safe in the neighborhood. And finally, green spaces offer opportunities for people to participate in voluntary work. As was stressed by Julia, and I will say it again, that green space creation and improvement can be especially important in socially excluded areas to improve the quality of the life of the residents there and to increase inclusive communities. The pictures you can see here, they show some examples from Amsterdam. The one on the bottom right, it shows people working on a climate-proof community garden in public space. And the picture on the left, it's taken by an NGO who set up urban gardens. And as in their own words, they say these gardens, they serve as a healing, food and community garden. And this NGO, they focus specifically on socially excluded areas, and they are very successful with their projects. One last note on this side, it's important to mention that community participation ensures use and acceptance of urban green spaces. And this use and acceptance of urban green, I think they are crucial because without it, green will not deliver the health benefits. In Amsterdam, the previous examples I've showed, they've shown why green infrastructure is important for health. And therefore, we are very happy and proud that health became an important aspect of the Amsterdam Green Vision. It was drafted last year. In Amsterdam, we want to be a green city now at this time, but also for the next generations to come. And we want to be a city where health, nature, climate adaptation, and social well-being are most important. And to achieve all these goals, the city drafted the Urban Green Vision, and this vision describes how we will continue to make Amsterdam greener between now and 2050. So as I said before, we are very proud that health and social well-being are two main pillars in this vision, as health benefits of green infrastructure include improved levels of mental health, increased physical fitness, improved cognitive and immune function, as well as lower mortality rates. And also, what's very important that there's accumulating evidence showing that health benefits may be most substantial among the lowest socioeconomic groups. So the benefits urban green space can deliver contribute to our mission, promoting health of all people in Amsterdam and reducing health differences between prosperous and socially, economically deprived urban areas. So these were all my words, and I have a little movie. I believe we have some time, so I will show it, but will reiterate all the points that I've shown in a small movie. So I will try to share that with you. Then I have to.
Human history have we spent so little time in physical contact with animals and plants? Scientific evidence shows that we miss nature. Patients with a natural view from their room recover faster and require fewer painkillers than those that look out over a city. Prisoners with cell windows with views of nature have lower stress symptoms and fewer illnesses. University students with natural views score better on tests. Workers who see trees and flowers are less stressed and report fewer illnesses. And that's just a view of nature. If you actually go into it, the results are amazing. Being among plants produces lower concentrations of stress hormones, lower blood pressure, and boosts the immune system. People who meet in nature build a sense of community, and their prejudices about race and economic or educational status are reduced. Time in green settings reduces children's ADHD symptoms. The more nature we get during childhood, the more we want as adults, and the less we get, the less we want. Time spent outdoors gives us a sense of oneness with nature and with the universe, and being in nature can lead to transcendental experiences. Wow.
Back to my slides. Where are they? Actually, it was the last slide.
I was asked once how I view children.
I'm sorry.
I said as lone organisms on a hostile planet in the middle of nowhere. Because in a way, that's why we play, to change that situation. Science.
Hello.
Oh, sorry, my microphone was turned off.
Okay.
So this is sorry for this ending. It was a bit messy, but I hope I made the case for green infrastructure and health, and I thank you for listening.
Okay. Yeah. That was great, Imke. Thank you very much. And I like the little film clip that we had, because it says it all, and it transcends all languages as well, which is a really good thing. We have had some questions starting to come in for both of you, which is good. I'd like to start with one really for Julia, I think. Julia, do you see perhaps now that health is the right and the most powerful tool to persuade local authorities in particular to invest more in green infrastructure? It was a very interesting point you made, that that the health benefits are well understood by local authorities, and yet the health budgets do not appear to be being used to this end.
Yeah, I think we're at a very odd situation, certainly in England, where the health benefits of green infrastructure are now really widely understood. That the evidence had been growing before the pandemic, and then I think everyone realised during the pandemic how much they benefited from being able to go out to green spaces. And we had the Parks Minister saying, wonderful, we can all go back to green spaces. And there was a real sense that the penny had dropped, that green spaces are vital, not just for physical health, but for our mental health and well-being as well. But there's still a big problem with finding the funding to make that happen. So most green spaces in England are looked after and funded by the local council, the municipality, but they have very little money to do that maintenance of green space. The health sector, public health people now really understand the benefits of green spaces. There's a little bit of public health money going into them, but there isn't very much. Most of the money goes into healthcare, which is fixing us after we've got ill. And I think there's going to have to be a big shift. Today, the government has announced that it's going to be planting many, many more trees, which should be wonderful for our health. But that's only going to happen if they're planted near where people live. And I haven't seen the details of the announcement, but I think, who's going to look after those trees? It's no good just planting them and expecting them to live. They need to be watered and looked after, at least for the first few years. So I think there's a big bit of joining up to be done to make sure that now we understand the health benefits of green spaces. We've got the evidence. We need to put the funding in the right place to make it happen.
Yes, thanks for that. Imke, do you think that it's going to be a big driver in getting investments from Health Department? We were always impressed, I have to say, through Perfect at the close links in Amsterdam between planning, health and green infrastructure. It became quite a highlight, particularly the study visit there, to see this working together. But would you say health is investing in green infrastructure?
Sadly, I think I would agree with Julia. So I think we're making steps in Amsterdam, but I wouldn't say that health is investing in green infrastructure. Not yet. And mainly, it's the health department. Maybe we are only a small team that focus on spatial planning and health. And the biggest part of the department is focusing on healthcare. And I think what makes it difficult is that actually you are investing in prevention. So that's probably why it's difficult, because you invest and you don't know of actually we can argue where the money lands, but you don't know for sure. So I think that's the main issue why health is not investing in spatial planning, because actually a lot of people are saying we should work on prevention, but then the budgets are not there yet to actually do so.
I think there's a job to be done there, without a doubt. Now, it does seems to be a bit of an oversight and so on.
But to come back, actually, I think it's a great win that, for instance, in the green fission, health has become so dominant now, because it's a document, but it's a start. That it's actually the first time that we link it so explicitly. So we are not there yet, but I think we are making steps to in the end get there.
Yeah, it's an interesting outcome from Perfect, actually, in terms of general recommendations to Europe, which the project is in a position to do. We have a couple more questions here. What is the best way to get different departments in local authorities to work together in an integrated manner? How do they get out of the siloed working? And I think, again, from experience, that applied across the project. But Julia, do you want to have a first go at that?
Yes, it's not easy, because different departments have different priorities and different languages. They use different words for things. One of the things we've found most effective is that councils, municipalities that have as one of their objectives reducing health inequalities can help make that joining up happen. The thing about health inequalities is that they're measured. In most places, certainly in the UK, and I think in many countries, public health teams have measurements of health inequalities, and they track whether they're getting worse or better. They track where the worst health inequalities are. So that data is freely available. And so if a council decides that it wants to reduce health inequalities as a corporate aim across the whole council, and then asks every department to focus on what it can do to reduce health inequalities, that can be really powerful. And it's then possible, for instance, for the planning team to start thinking about planning policies that could help reduce health inequalities. And when we go and talk to councils to help them do this, very often the planners, although they are concerned about creating healthy places, they don't know anything about health inequalities, and they don't know which parts of their area have poor health. And often when you explain to them how bad the health is of some of their communities, they're really shocked and they really want to do something to help. So health inequalities is a really powerful way of getting that joined up support.
That's very helpful. Imke?
Yeah, I agree with what Julia says, and in addition, I think what would be helpful to increase the interdepartment work is actually, for us, the Perfect project helped, because I'm in the spatial in a department that focuses on spatial planning and health, and we are not in charge of the green policies in the city. That's another department. But the Perfect project helped us to actually talk to each other and visit places abroad in Europe and actually get to know each other. So that's one thing that it starts with, just get to know each other and talk to each other, and if you know each other, then things start to happen. And another thing that might help is, I think, from the health department, also create within your department a team that focuses on spatial planning and health. So from the health team, work on spatial planning, and you have the spatial planning that work on health, and bring them together. So and I'm not sure if that's in Amsterdam we have such a team, and in the Netherlands there's more, but I'm not sure how that works in other countries in Europe. So maybe that could also be helpful.
I think that's absolutely true, because it's also, as Julia said in her presentation, and you can see on the TCPA website, this reuniting of health and planning in particular can be done. I should point out to the audience that, in fact, a key part of the Perfect project was the development of stakeholder groups. Each partner had to identify the organizations and individuals that would be necessary to stimulate investment in green infrastructure in their particular local authority or region. And this, again, through Interreg, was a huge benefit, because health officials, biodiversity experts, and so on, were all enabled to join in on the study visits and to share experiences, not only with their own staff, but of course with their peers from other countries. And I think that in the fullness of time may prove to be quite a beneficial thing. We have a question for Imke. I'm impressed by the amount of ground cover planting between roads and cycleways in the Netherlands. Is that still favoured? If so, how could we persuade UK highways and local authorities to invest in it?
Was that specifically in Amsterdam or in the Netherlands?
Netherlands, yeah, not particularly Amsterdam.
Yeah, one way maybe to make an argument for that is that if you put green between a cycle road and a main road, you increase the distance to the main road, which is beneficial for air quality. So from that perspective, you to reduce So it's not the green that's cleaning the air, but it's actually the distance because of the green that reduces your exposure. So that could be one way. That could be a case for from the health perspective. But of course, you could also bring in rainproofing or biodiversity. So I think there's multiple benefits of green infrastructure that you can bring in to make this happen.
Okay. Julia, I can ask you the obvious, and that is, how do we engage with the highways and transport on this? But I think we know the answer to that. We just have to keep trying on this unification. There's a question here, which is there a monetary figure somewhere that shows in pounds or euros invested in green space, how that equals to the savings on health bills? And there's a partial answer to that in terms of do look at the health, wealth and happiness expert paper, because whilst that's not bursting with statistics, it does actually help us all understand how you can develop an economic model for demonstrating such savings. But Julia, have we got any such evidence yet in hard numbers?
I think we're getting there, and there's been a huge amount of work done in England around natural capital accounting. And about 8 years ago, the government set up an independent committee of environmental economists called the Natural Capital Committee. And they started doing work looking at the economic value of green infrastructure and other natural capital, the natural things that the world gives us. And so looking at their reports, there's good information, but that then led to lots of other reports. So London, for instance, has done a natural capital account, and it started, those sort of ways of calculating the value are starting to produce figures. So a good starting place is the Perfect report, and that has lots of references to other reports. And you might also look at the Das Gupta review that was published recently about the economic benefits of nature. And what all of that tells us is that the biggest benefits are the health benefits when nature is close to people. And that's why urban green infrastructure is so important, because it's great having green infrastructure in remote islands. It's really good, but it doesn't benefit people's health in the way that having green infrastructure locally does. And some of that benefit is starting now to be captured in economic terms.
Thank you. Imke, do you have many stats? I know that we have had presentations from Amsterdam on this, but
yeah, there's the National Health Institute. They did a case study for Amsterdam, monitoring the green space. So I think if you Google on natural capital model, National Health Institute, Netherlands, Amsterdam, that you will find this report. I believe it's in English also.
Okay, we've got one last question I think we just have time for, and that is addressed to both of you, but Imke first. Do you think the public are fully aware of all the benefits that we are aware of green infrastructure? So it was always good, and of course we show photos of parks and places and cycle lanes all full of people and everybody's out there and all the rest of it. But do you see a noticeable increase in the use of green space?
Yeah, we see an increase, but I'm not sure everybody is equally aware, and at least we know that not everybody is equally using and appreciating the green in the city. And then you go back to the people who are least using it and least appreciating it are the people who could benefit actually or the less healthy people. Mm. So then maybe they are not aware enough that what green spaces can mean for them. But also maybe we should do more in those places, organize more, improve the quality. So come back to your question, I think we are not aware enough as people.
No, Again, there's a job to be done there. Julia, would you agree with that?
I would agree. I think people are much more aware than they were even a couple of years ago, particularly of the mental health benefits of green infrastructure. But there's a long way to go. And I think where people are perhaps haven't understood is the links between climate change, green infrastructure and health, and the really important role, for instance, that mature trees can play. So it's awareness is much better than it was, but there's still a long way to go.
Okay, well, thank you. That was a very good opening session, I think, for the whole conference. And don't forget, everybody, that it is all about the multi-benefit. So we have focused here on health, but there's lots more to come. Many other very, very good examples of other links and so on. And by the time you finish this conference, you will get a marvelous holistic view of the value of green infrastructure. So thank you both very much for your presentations. And I think I'm right in saying we now have a 15-minute break, and then do come back and we will continue with the conference. So thank you all very much. See you later.